Howdy there. Rad Power just filed for bankruptcy. If that means nothing to you, hopefully I can help the gravity of that sink in for you. And to be clear, I'm sort of celebrating that. Not at all celebrating those who are likely to lose their jobs or all the e-bike owners who are probably getting screwed, but some aspects of the company going under are potentially positive in my eyes. Hi, I'm Trent. I've been a bike mechanic for something like 7 years now, and bikes are my main thing. I ride bikes, I work on bikes, I love bikes and what they can do for individuals and society at large. I hope my passion for bikes and how they can change people's lives is apparent. My job is bicycle and ski technician, and this is my first crack at something like a real YouTube video. So excuse any amateurish stuff. I'm doing my best here, and I will be reading off of my laptop because I don't have a teleprompter. This is the cheap e-bike apocalypse. Rad Power was one of the largest e-bike manufacturers in the US market. The company was once valued over $1 billion. From my vantage point as a bike mechanic, Rad seemed to be printing money. Their bikes are everywhere, and the asking price isn't really all that low. And being a bike mechanic, I know that the components were not pricey components. All that to say, I figured their margins were pretty strong, and the direct-to-consumer model was making them crazy money. Sure, creating frames and running a whole business isn't cheap, but my sense was that Rad Power was probably killing it financially. And also contributing to a much, much larger problem. That problem? The cheap e-bike apocalypse. I didn't coin that term, I just read it on Pink Bike, probably. This cheap e-bike apocalypse is something that I've been quietly observing for quite some time now. In the earlier days of e-bikes, you would really only see two kinds. Those pretty early, not very good attempts by reputable brands to make broadly appealing e-bikes. They kind of sucked. Didn't have a lot of range. They were noisy. They were really heavy. But, it all starts somewhere. And the super jank DIY e-bikes that the occasional tinkerer, my favorite kind of bike shop customer, would bring in, asking for us for assistance that would make our insurance drop us immediately. Slowly, the e-bike landscape started to change, with the biggest upheaval around 2019 to 2020. Somewhat of an avalanche of very clearly inexpensive e-bikes, branded with unparsable combinations of letters and words, started to appear. One of my friends from the good old days at OCC, shout out to the Pirates, bought one of these, and when he brought it into the bike shop that I was working at for me to see it in person, I kind of had to bite my tongue about what I thought about it. These kinds of e-bikes have lots and lots of problems. However, I would first like to talk about what few things are good about these e-bikes and why people buy them in the first place. The physical attributes of these e-bikes somehow look cool to a lot of people. I cannot explain that phenomena. For some reason, fat tires are a very strong indicator to the less informed bike buyer that a bike is super nice. Okay, hold up. Tangent about tires. Mountain bike tires are generally classified into 3 categories: normal, plus, and fat. Perhaps we need some wokeness in the bike world because those names are kind of insane. Normal mountain bike tires range from 2.1 to 2.5-ish inches in width. And I'm showing you that on screen right now. This is the Salsa Spearfish. It runs like a 2.4 width tire. And for another example, here's a Santa Cruz Nomad, which ideally would be a 2.5, probably front and rear, maybe 2.4. There is probably a very optimal tire in this size range for most conditions and use cases. Whatever you need, it's probably there. Plus tires came after the proliferation of fat tires to split the difference between mega volume and more normal volume. And they range from 2.6, that's kind of controversial, up to about 3.25 inches, usually 2.8 or 3.0. This tire on the front of this bike is a 3.0, and this one is running 2.8. They have their use cases, and they generally work on a lot of terrain, but they tend to be kind of heavy or fragile or both. And they're often very undamped and bouncy in a bad way. And we have fat tires. Originally designed for sand and snow almost exclusively, these tires are usually 4+ inches in width, and really they are for very, very rare use cases like sand and snow. This is the Surly Moonlander, which has the most insane fat tires I know of, 24 rim width by like 6 inches. It's pretty crazy. This is a little bit more normal fat bike. Almost no one should use these. Anyways, back to your regular scheduled programming, I guess. almost no one should use these. Now that you're educated, seriously, what the heck is going on with people being drawn to fat tires? Why does a 4 to 5 inch tire trigger something in our dumb little hairless ape brains and make people think, yeah, that's got to be a really nice bike. I bet it costs like $5,000. Whoa, it's $8.99 on AliExpress? I'm a fool if I don't take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime offer. Once again, you do not want or need fat tires unless you are genuinely going to ride on sand, like often. Don't. Your bike will hate you for it. Or if you are genuinely going to be riding on a lot of snow. Also, not very advisable for e-bikes. There are fat bikes made for those niche purposes. And for those niche purposes, they rock. But you, average e-bike consumer, will be sorely let down by fat tires. Continuing on with the few positives I can give these bikes, well, they tend to have a comfortable, upright fit that works for many people, as long as you fit within the 3, 2, or often 1 frame size. They usually seem to work okay, until they don't, for people who really don't ride much. If we're talking an average of a couple miles a week or a month, it probably will be okay. And lastly, price. That's kind of the whole deal with these things. They're cheap. Like, you should be concerned for your safety cheap. And I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to you, but really, I have some expertise here. You get what you pay for with bikes, I promise. It's not bike elitism to remind people that you get what you pay for. They exist to be cheap. Why do they have a rear hub drive as opposed to mid-drive? It's cheaper. Why do these bikes have a 6 or 7 speed freewheel as opposed to a much more useful and durable 10 or more speeds? It's cheap. Why do they have fat tires? More rubber is definitely more expensive. Anyways, why do they have typically small-ish battery capacities? Why are those batteries sketch as hell? Cost cutting. That is going to be my first bone to pick with these. The batteries. Rechargeable lithium-ion batteries are all around us. It's an amazing technology that enables our modern lives. How else could the Cybertruck have a 250-mile range on its best day? Batteries. Of the capacity and specs the e-bikes need are expensive. Those materials and manufacturing ain't cheap. For reference, a replacement 600 watt-hour battery from Bosch has a retail price of just under $1,200. Ouch. So if you're a cheap e-bike manufacturer, how would you cut some costs? Well, the battery is a good place to start. If you don't care much about the safety of your customers, batteries that don't even carry a UL certification will cost less than those that do. Those batteries may catch on fire, but if you're a basically faceless, unaccountable company selling bikes in the US and elsewhere, you're probably not going to get in any trouble for that. And hey, no shade to China in particular. They make the whole range from doodoo bikes all the way up to some really nice stuff. Once again, you get what you pay for. This brings us back to Rad Power. It appears the primary reason they filed for bankruptcy, or at least the final straw, is the battery recall situation. As of November 24, 2025, the CPSC said the following. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC, is warning consumers to immediately stop using lithium-ion batteries for Rad Power e-bikes. Model numbers RP1304, RAD-S1, because the batteries pose a risk of serious injury and death. The hazardous batteries can unexpectedly ignite and explode. The hazardous batteries can unexpectedly ignite and explode, posing a fire hazard to consumers, especially when the battery or the harness has been exposed to water and debris. CPSC is aware of 31 reports of fire, including 12 reports of property damage totaling approximately $734,500. Some of these incidents occurred when the battery was not charging, the product was not in use, and the product was in storage. Yikes. In the greater context, 31 reports of fires is not a whole lot relative to the number of Rad Power batteries out in the wild, but still kind of sketch. What did Rad Power do in response? Quote from the CPSC once again. The importer, Rad Power Bikes Incorporated of Seattle, Washington, has refused to agree to an acceptable recall. Given its financial situation, Rad Power Bikes has indicated to CPSC that it is unable to offer replacement batteries or refunds to all consumers. So Rad Power's solution is to offer customers a replacement Safe Shield battery as an upgrade at what they say is a solid discount. I wish I was kidding, but paying for battery safety as an upgrade is kind of where we're at in the cheap e-bike landscape. All right, enough about batteries. My next bone to pick with the cheap e-bikes is their insane features. Fat tires, as I've laid out, are wasteful, heavy, slow, needlessly costly, and completely impractical for 99% of the riders who are going to be buying these bikes. But what if those fat tires weren't on a common wheel size, like 26-inch, but an obscure, even less practical wheel size, which almost no bike shop will have replacement inner tubes, spokes, or rims, 20-inch. The only potential benefit here is being able to fit the bike into a very slightly smaller space. And we see wheels even smaller than 20-inch on these cheap e-bikes. Totally asinine wheel sizes that are very non-standard. If you wanted to do your customers a favor for serviceability on the e-bike, you would equip the bike with 26, 27.5, or 29-inch wheels and call it good, because bike shops are going to have wheels available, tubes, tires, all of it. Another asinine feature is that many of these bikes are folding bikes. How do you make a bike cooler? Put a hinge in the middle of it. Seriously, the compromise to frame integrity, frame flex, and overall design constraints are why you don't see a whole lot of folding bikes out there. They exist for their somewhat niche purpose, but for most it's not a benefit at all. Triangles are really strong, and taking away the top tube means a lot of added frame weight to compensate for the loss of frame rigidity. Not to mention that folding bikes have to have this crazy folding mast for the bars, and I have personally seen those snapped in half being limped into the shop by a disappointed cheap e-bike owner. Or worse, people getting injured because of them. The last feature I'll touch on is the inclusion of a sort of child seat on the back. I see this fairly often with the cheap e-bikes. I'd like to avoid any encouragement of kids riding an e-bike with a friend on the back because that's pretty dangerous. I've seen it plenty of times around my neighborhood, and I'm sure you've seen them around too. Also, there's no way that these rear wheels are actually designed with the weight of 2 passengers in mind. And I know this because I couldn't tell you how many broken spokes I have seen on these cheap e-bikes. Always on the rear wheel. They equip them with super thick gauge spokes and they still break. I guess we have to talk about kids riding e-bikes, huh? At the risk of sounding like an old man yelling at clouds, I don't really think able-bodied kids should be riding e-bikes for the most part. Aside from them being kind of dangerous, it's just unnecessary. Why do kids need battery power, man? I rode to school in a pre-e-bike world for much of my youth, and it's fine. It's actually quite fun. The freedom that you have just from a regular old acoustic bike is fine. Also, I say acoustic as opposed to electric. You get it. I see kids at my local trails where I'm filming wheeling uphill on insanely overpowered e-bikes that are not actually class 1, 2, or 3 e-bikes. That's a whole other thing. But they're actually just less powerful, but still very torquey, small motorcycles, if you will. The design most of them are copying is the surron. And that is a whole other video. Those piss me off real bad. I hate those things. All right, where does all of this leave us? I have 2 things I want you to take away, dear viewer. The first thing is to carefully consider your e-bike purchase. Does it have a UL certification for the battery? Are you buying it from a reputable brand or from a brick and mortar shop who can assist you if and when things go wrong? And things do tend to go wrong with e-bikes a little bit more frequently than acoustic bikes. That's okay. There's more points of failure. There's more complexity. It's kind of to be expected. You're going to want to have the support of a shop who can help you. Does it say Bosch on it? If the drive unit says Bosch, you're probably going to have a good time on your e-bike. I am not a Bosch shill. I just have gathered the experience of Bosch being the most reliable, serviceable, and long-lasting drive system. But Bosch, call me if you want to send me a sick e-mountain bike. I can be bought. I just want you guys to think about an e-bike as a long-term purchase. If your budget really only allows for an e-bike that's essentially disposable, man, just don't. Just don't. The second big takeaway is that we really need some legislation on stuff like this. I know, I'm being naive, thinking that Congress could respond to rapidly evolving technology with any sort of urgency or competency. But really basic stuff that could apply to many electronics could make a big dent in the worst of this issue. How about strict battery safety and quality control standards for anything being imported, regardless of device? And perhaps right to repair legislation, requiring minimum serviceable life of products with spare parts and documentation available. And while I'm at it with my wish list, let's get a whole lot more investment in bike infrastructure in tandem with public transit so that people have the option and desire to get a bike and use it in place of a car, electric or acoustic. Subsidies for people buying bikes and e-bikes for their commutes to work? To us jaded Americans, these things sound genuinely impossible. But the UK has the Cycle to Work scheme, which allows a lot of Brits to afford a bike for commuting and leisure. And plenty of countries have excellent bike and transit infrastructure. The EU has some really solid consumer protection for seemingly any products you can think of. Okay, I'll stop dreaming now. Anyways, don't buy the piece of shit bike, please. You'll have a much, much better experience with something quality that will serve you for years to come. Or just get an acoustic bike. I love my acoustic bikes. Thanks for watching. I intend to make some other videos about other things at some point, one of them being a review of this bike right here, the beautiful Transition Sentinel. But I have a full-time bike mechanic job, so I'm going to get back to that. The people need me.